So we've got some folks joining us from all across Arizona, which is really exciting. Thank you so much for being here and for tuning in to hopefully learn something new about going solar. My name is Adrian Keller. I'm the Arizona Program Director for Solar United Neighbors, and I'm really thankful to be joined by Kate Bowman with Vote Solar, as well as Autumn Johnson with the Arizona Solar Energy Industries Association. Thank you both for co-hosting this webinar with us. I'm really excited to dive in. Just one quick housekeeping before we get started. So we are in a webinar mode, so the presenters cannot see or hear you, but we want to answer all of your questions. At the bottom of your screen, you should notice a chat box as well as a Q&A box. If you have any questions throughout the presentation tonight, please drop those questions in the Q&A box, and we'll get to all of those after we wrap up the presentation. The chat box, keep in mind, just everybody in the webinar is able to see what's going on in there. So use the chat more for just like a quick comment or something. And if you have a question, really direct that to the Q&A. My colleague Jess White is going to be monitoring the chat and drop in some helpful links. And so if you need anything, she will be there to help you out. Additionally, if you're somebody who would like to use closed captions, you can enable those by clicking more at the bottom of your screen. Click Captions, Show Captions, and then select your preferred language and hit Save. I'm just going to leave this slide up for one more moment in case anybody needs to read those captions instructions. Perfect. So I thought we'd get started tonight by just talking a little bit about some of the reasons why people go solar in the first place. I think it's fair to say one of the most common reasons people go solar is to save money. By installing solar, you're able to generate most of your own electricity, reducing the amount of electricity you need to purchase from your utility company, which helps save you money. I also hear a lot of people who want to go solar for kind of a general themes that you could refer to as energy independence, or really just the freedom to be able to have a say in where your own energy is coming from, as opposed to being totally reliant on a monopoly utility company. Distributed solar in particular, meaning solar installed at or near where it's needed, is especially helpful at improving the resilience and stability of our grid. I also hear from lots of people who are really worried about future utility rate increases or general inflation. We've definitely seen some rate increases for a lot of the utilities in Arizona across the year. By installing solar, it can help you avoid the ups and downs of the energy market and help hedge against some of that future inflation and utility rate increases. Solar provides an affordable, steady supply of electricity that can really help with that. And then finally, we live in Arizona. We are the sunniest state in the nation. Florida may call themselves the Sunshine State, but we get more sunshine than them. This is our most abundant natural resource, and we should be harvesting that sunshine to power our communities rather than relying on fossil fuels that are shipped in from out of state or out of the US. Whatever your reason for wanting to go solar, we're glad that you're here, and we hope you learned something tonight. Now, you may be asking yourself, how does solar work? If you're especially new to this is a very valid question. We're in a 101 session tonight, so we're not going to be going too in depth, but this is a helpful starting point. When we're talking about solar tonight, we're really referring to PV solar or photovoltaics. That's the technology that converts sunshine into a flow of electricity. Solar panels are made up of several semiconducting materials, mostly silicon. When photons from sunlight hit the solar panel, it dislodges those electrons, generating a flow of electricity. Now, you'll need an inverter to invert that flow of electricity from direct current, DC, to alternating current, AC, so that your outlets and appliances and everything can actually use that power in your home. Your electrical service panel, kind of think of that as the brains of the whole operation, directing power where it's needed, when it's needed. And then solar customers will have what's called a bidirectional utility meter. This is important because you need to be able to measure any electricity you're purchasing from the utility, but you also need to be able to measure the opposite way around. If you're producing more solar energy than you're needing, it's being fed back out onto the grid, your utility needs to be able to measure that. And then more and more common these days is a battery that's becoming a much more preferable option for many people who go solar. And so when you're home and you have solar and you're using electricity, the sun is shining, any electricity your solar panels are going to go to your home and for that power first. If you're producing any extra electricity, that will be fed back out onto the grid for credit. Now, what makes a good site for solar? I think it's important to say that we do live in Arizona. So basically you need to be a homeowner or a property owner, I should say, in order to install solar. Unlike some other states that have community solar, there's not really a mechanism for renters to benefit from solar, unfortunately. So when we're talking about installing solar tonight, we're really talking about property owners. Shading is something that I think some people forget to think about when they're considering solar. If you have a lot of significant trees in your yard, or maybe you're next to a building that's casting a large shadow over your roof, that's definitely something to consider. It's pretty common for people to trim trees or even remove some trees before they go solar, but if that's not an option, definitely something to think through before you start talking to installers. The size, shape, and slope of your roof is also really important here. Ideally, it would be at between a 15 to 40-degree slope, but don't worry if your roof isn't that. Installers have a variety of techniques and tools they can use to pitch those panels so that they're at the optimal angle. And then we always encourage people, if you can, install solar on the south side of your home. That's where you're going to be able to absorb the most amount of sunlight and generate the most amount of electricity. East and west facing solar can certainly work great as well. And then when thinking about the age and quality of your roof, of course, the newer your roof is, the better it's going to be for solar. But the general rule of thumb and our recommendation is that your roof should have at a minimum 10 to 15 years life left in it before installing solar. If you know your roof is kind of crumbling and it's only got a year left, it's going to be really expensive to install that solar and then have to remove it in a year, repair your roof, and then reinstall that solar. So newer is always better, but at least 10 to 15 years for your roof. If you're unsure about this, you're not sure if your home is a good site for solar, I highly encourage you to reach out to Solar United Neighbors, the nonprofit I work for. We can do a free satellite roof review of your property and check the shading, size, shape, slope, and everything in your roof to tell you whether or not you're a good candidate before you start talking to installers. There's definitely a pretty diverse variety of roof types in Arizona. The good news is that solar can handle, or excuse me, just about any roof type can handle solar these days. Installers are constantly improving their techniques and technology is always getting better. There's very, very few roof types that just absolutely cannot handle solar. For a sloped roof, that's usually that asphalt shingle or maybe it's tile. Rails are going to be screwed onto your roof, and then the panels are sort of clipped onto those beams. If you've got a flat roof, solar can work as well. Sometimes the installers will weigh the panels down to keep them in place and or use what's called a pitch pocket system just to angle those panels up to the optimal angle so they're absorbing the most amount of sunlight. Last thing I'm going to talk about before I hand it off is about solar co-ops. This is a really big part about what Solar United Neighbors does in Arizona. We'll group together a large number of homeowners in a similar geographic area. We usually aim for about 100 to 150. We educate those folks all about solar. We check out their roof for solar viability, and then we actually issue an RFP and request bids from solar installers on behalf of the homeowners in the group. Installers are bidding discounted pricing in order to win such a large group's contract. And then Sun, as a nonprofit, is there to provide free education, support, and technical advice, whatever you need throughout the entire process. We're trying to make it as easy as possible and as affordable as possible to install solar in Arizona. If you live in the Phoenix metro area or in Pima County near Tucson or up in northern Arizona near Flagstaff or Sedona, we'll be launching a solar co-op in those areas sometime this year. And we've got a wait list that you can sign up for in case you'd like to be notified when those campaigns open up. That's all for me, and I'll pass it over to Kate.
Thanks, Adrian. Hi, everybody. Kate Bowman. I'm with Vote Solar, and we're a nonprofit organization working across 26 states, and we work on state-level clean energy policy to advance the policies that make it possible for more people to access and benefit from solar. And so I'm going to start by talking a little bit about how you might want to go about starting the process of installing solar. One of the biggest decisions you'll need to make is choosing an installer. And there's lots of good companies out there, but it's also worth knowing that there are companies that specialize in different parts of the solar installation process. So there are companies that specialize specifically in identifying solar customers and maybe providing you with a bid and making a sale. And then there are companies that will actually do the install. And then if you use financing, sometimes a totally different company could be involved in the financing and loan side of your project. So it can be confusing. You want to ask questions to be sure you understand the specific details of the installation and the financing you're signing up for, and who's actually performing the work on your home. And of course, you want to know that they're experienced. So first, I always recommend getting at least 3 bids from different solar companies. And that's going to allow you to compare and contrast what they're offering, not just in terms of price, but also other details like the size of the installation and the equipment they're using. And that can just give you a little bit more information about what your options are out there. And of course, compare price. Solar United Neighbors also has some super helpful resources through their help desk. And so you can request to have your bid evaluated by an impartial expert to get their opinion on what's included. Going into the bid process, you're going to need to know a few things. You need to know your utility company and your electricity usage. And ideally, you want to know your electricity usage every month of the year so that an installer can size the system to meet your specific home's energy needs. And then last, you might want to look into whether there's any programs your utility is offering that would benefit you. So most utilities are not offering incentives for solar installations anymore, but some are beginning to offer programs to support adoption of battery storage. So again, just making sure you know your utility's specific policies and programs when it comes to solar. When you're talking with potential installers to assess whether or not they're qualified, you might want to ask about their experience. You might want to ask how long they've been in business. And you can always ask whether they've completed installations in your neighborhood or like yours. Usually installers specialize in residential versus commercial solar. Some do both. And so, you want to make sure that they're used to doing a project like yours. Then next, the process for getting a permit to install solar can vary by city or county. And there's also a separate process for interconnecting your system to the grid, and that depends on your utility. Installers can help you with all of this, but it does vary, especially the permitting process. So you might want to ask whether an installer has completed projects in your city or with your utility. And it's not necessarily a problem if they hadn't, but the permitting and interconnection process is one step along the way where things can get hung up. And so it's good to be clear on, what's required, what you need to submit to your city or to your utility. And if your installer is experienced working with your city or your utility, they can give you a better idea of how long that process is going to take. Next, just like any other type of business, you can look up reviews for solar installers, including from the Better Business Bureau. You can also ask for recommendations on any like neighborhood groups or websites or kind of Facebook groups that you're part of to find out, who in your neighborhood has installed solar and who have they gone with and what's their experience been like. There's also some solar specific websites that provide reviews like Energy Sage and Solar Reviews, and they can have some good information on there, but just be aware that these sites are also lead generators. So if you do put in your contact information, you might get contacted by more solar installers, and depending on where you are in the process, that may or may not be helpful to you. Another question you can ask is ask about your solar installer's policy for warranties. Typically the equipment in a solar installation, so the panels that go on the roof and the inverter, those are usually covered by a manufacturer warranty. So if your panel fails or an inverter fails, a couple years down the road, it's covered by the equipment manufacturer and they'll replace it under their warranty. There's a separate warranty for the solar installer's labor and workmanship. So if there's something they do as part of the installation process that needs to be repaired down the road, you're counting on that warranty with the company to cover the work. And so you want to look for a company that's going to stand by their work and that's offering a good labor or workmanship warranty. And these issues are pretty rare, but that's something else you could ask about. And you can also ask whether that warranty is transferable to a new owner if you do sell the home. There's some licensing and certification requirements you can check. If they don't provide it, you can ask for a company's registrar of contractors number, and you can check to be sure they're in good standing on the registrar of contractors website. And then, again, if the person you're working with is part of a sales company, be sure to get the name of the company that will be doing the actual install, the people who are showing up to put the panels on your roof so that you know who that is. And then last, you can ask how many employees of the company have what's called a NABCEP certification. That's a National Solar and Storage Installation certification. It's not required to install solar, but it's generally an indication that a company is investing in training for their employees. Maybe they have more expertise, more experienced people working for them. So that's something you could ask about. So next, what to expect once you've chosen an installer. Step is that the company you chose to work with is going to work with you to customize the design of an installation specifically for your home. And your installer will probably ask you to sign a contract once you've both agreed on the equipment and the size of the installation. And then after you sign the contract, they'll go ahead and start ordering the equipment and applying for the permits and getting the installation on their schedule and their calendar. The actual process of installing the panels on your roof typically only takes 1 or 2 days, but some of the steps leading up to the install can take longer. So for example, Sometimes there's a wait time to get the permit approved from your city or your utility. Sometimes there's backlogs of permits that cities have to approve. So it just depends. But once the system's installed, your local government might want to inspect it, and the utility will have to come and complete the final interconnection to connect your system to the electricity grid. So that whole process from start to finish can take a month or longer, especially depending on just your schedule, and when you're able to schedule, site visits and things like that with the installer. So once the installation is complete, there's typically not any maintenance required for solar. There's not moving parts. So it's usually pretty simple. And most installers will actually recommend you don't do anything in terms of maintenance. Some people like to wash the panels to make sure they're clean and they're producing the most electricity, but often rain is enough to keep them clean, and it's just not worth the risk of getting up on your roof. You can also damage the panels if you wash them with cold water when they're really hot from the sun. That can damage the glass. So typically installers say, you don't need to do anything maintenance wise. And then typically your installation is also going to include smart inverters. And what those do is they allow you to track the energy generation from your panels through an app. So you can tell right away if you have a panel that's not performing the way that you expected, if something's not working, if something is blocking the panels. And in some cases, you can choose to give access to your installer. So that way, if something happens, they'll get notified and they may be able to figure it out and fix it before you even realize. Next, what are your top reasons for installing solar? If not, your primary reason is probably to save money. So you probably want to know exactly how much power is this solar installation going to generate? How much am I going to save on my utility bill? And that's something your solar installer, again, can help you with. They can provide you with an estimate of the generation and the savings over the long term, and other things if you want to know, like how many greenhouse gas emissions am I avoiding? And there's assumptions that affect that forecast that are going to be specific to your project and your house. But if you want to look into it for yourself to get a general idea, maybe before you've decided on an installer, there's a few things you can do. First, you can estimate how much power you can generate with the space available on your roof using an online tool called PV Watts. It's free, it's pretty easy to use, and it'll forecast solar generation based on your specific location. So it can account for things like shading from a tree or your neighbor's building or something like that. And your installer is actually going to use much more precise tools that do a better job accounting for specific things like that that are specific to your home. But PV Watts can give you an idea, with the space I have on my roof, how much power can I generate? When it comes to savings, you have to understand how your utility will credit you for the power. And there's two ways that you save money on your bills. First, during times when you're using energy and you're producing solar power, the solar goes directly to power your home and your appliance. So you're using power from your solar panels instead of purchasing power from the utility. And so how much you save depends on your utility and the rate that you're on and what they would have charged you for that electricity if you weren't producing it yourself from solar. So you can take a look at your power bill to see how much you're paying per kilowatt hour of energy. And that's how much you can save for each kilowatt hour that you're able to generate yourself. And so, depending on your utility and the time of day, and like I said, the rate you're on, that could be as much as 30 cents a kilowatt hour. That's the on peak summer rate for several utilities in Arizona. So, you're saving 30 cents a kilowatt hour every time you produce a kilowatt hour during that time period on your roof. When you're not using energy, let's say you're not home, none of your appliances are running, the power that you generate will be exported to the grid. And when that happens, you get a credit. Most utilities will give you a credit for each kilowatt hour exported to the grid. And the value of the credit varies by utility. Right now, it's about 7 cents for APS customers. It's about 6 cents if you're a TEP customer, and it's about 3.5 cents if you're an SRP customer. And for APS and TEP customers, the price that utilities pay you for power you export to the grid steps down over time, but you as an individual lock in the rate that's effective when you install solar for 10 years. So if you install solar today and the rate is about 7 cents for APS, you can lock that in for 10 years. So even if the rate steps down over time, it doesn't affect you. If you're served by a different utility, like a municipal utility, make sure you check with the utility to see what their policy is. It's really important to understand that policy and how much you're compensated when you send energy to the grid in order to know how much you're going to save. Next, a question that people have more and more often is, should I add a battery? As battery storage has gotten more available, this is a really popular option. It's great. Adding a battery is the only way that you're going to have power if the grid goes down. If you don't have a battery and the grid goes down, your panels will stop exporting power to the grid. And that's actually for the safety of the people who might be coming to work on the lines to fix them. But if you have a battery, you can have backup power. And so a battery can also help you maximize the value of your solar installation, because if you can store energy at your home instead of exporting it to the grid at those lower rates, then you can use more of your solar energy on site. You can avoid having to pay higher utility prices, and you can save more money. And if you do want to have backup power during a grid outage, you have to think about what you want to be able to power, because it's going to be expensive to install enough battery storage to power everything in your home. So you probably want to install batteries that can power a few critical appliances, like maybe your fridge, or allowing you to charge devices, versus installing a battery big enough to cover your entire home's usage in the summer. So definitely, more and more popular as the price of batteries come down, but it can still add fair amount of cost. And so something to bring up early in the process if you're interested in doing that. When it comes to paying for solar, many people choose to use a loan to finance the upfront cost of the system. And that can work out really well, especially if the loan amount is, similar to or less than what you're saving in your monthly utility bill from installing solar. And sometimes solar companies have a financing partner that they work with, but you can always go through a bank or a credit union as well. And there's no need to work, necessarily with the financer that anyone pitches to you. And when you're considering a loan, be sure to do a apples to apples comparison across different options. And when it comes to solar loans, loans can be structured differently. So you really want to ask for all of the details, and not just the interest rate, but compare, what fees are included. Some loans are structured so that they have lower interest rates, but they include upfront fees or other financing charges that aren't obvious. And so they're going to add to the cost. And, that low interest rate is not as attractive as it looks. So you might want to ask for the total cost of the loan, including all the fees. So you can really compare, what are you spending over the lifetime of the loan, and pick your best option. Some loans are also structured to account for the tax credit, which we're going to talk about a little bit more in the next slide. So they assume that you will be able to take advantage of the tax credit and apply that balance to the balance of the loan when you receive it, which is when whenever you file your taxes. And that could be a year or more after you actually complete the installation. So some loans are structured that way, where they're expecting you to apply that total amount of the tax credit to the loan. So if that's what, if that's how your loan is structured, you just want to make sure you know that, so you don't use it for something else. And then some loans allow you to pay extra to pay off the loan early if you want to, and make sure, like with any loan, that they allow you to apply your payment to the principal, so that you can actually reduce the total amount of interest that you owe over the lifetime of the loan. Another option is a lease. Some companies will offer leases, and this can be a good option for someone who's not eligible for the solar tax credit. And the lease allows the installer to take the tax credit on their behalf, and then they'll actually own and operate the system, which means they're also responsible for maintaining it. And in exchange, you pay a fixed monthly rate to lease the equipment from the owner, and you benefit from the power generation and the savings on your utility bill, just like you would with another financing option. Something to consider with a lease is that if you sell your home, the new owner will have to take over that lease, or else you might have to have the system removed if for some reason they don't want to have the take over the lease. So it can help, regardless of how you pay for the system, it can help to keep copies of your monthly utility bill before and after solar. So that way you can show a potential buyer exactly what they can be saving because of the solar panels on the roof, and what they're getting through the lease. Next, we'll talk about the tax credits. So there is today still a federal tax credit of 30% of the total cost of the system. And that applies to solar panels, and also can apply to battery storage as well. And the tax credit is non-refundable, which means that you have to owe at least as much in taxes as the value of the credit. And so if you have a credit of $10,000 and you only owe $8,000 in taxes, you don't get that full $10,000 back. You just get a refund of what you or you just get the taxes that you paid returned to you, the 8,000. So you can roll over the remaining value of the tax credit to a future year. Um, and you can take advantage of it that way if you don't owe enough to take full advantage of it in the first year. And then, because I know we'll get some questions about this, what's going on with the tax credit right now? The current administration's expressed a desire to roll back climate and clean energy programs that were passed under the previous administration. The solar tax credit specifically was created through an act of Congress, and it's in the tax code, the federal tax code. So that can only be amended or revoked through another act of Congress. I won't speculate on whether Congress is going to do that, but I think, just want to say that the tax credit is still in place, and until Congress changes it, that's the case. And then I'll also mention there's an Arizona state tax credit of $1,000, and then there's some other tax benefits at the state level too. Arizona offers a property tax exemption and a sales tax exemption. So you don't need to pay sales tax on your purchase, and then the value of the solar doesn't add to property taxes on your home. And then, as always, with the tax credit, it's really important to consult a tax professional to make sure you're eligible and not just rely on the estimate that a solar installer provides in the bill, because they don't necessarily know your specific tax situation. So that's something you really want to make sure you understand for yourself. And I think with that, I'm turning it over to Autumn.
Hi, thanks everybody. Having a little bit of internet issues today, so I've got a separate device going. If someone cannot hear me at some point or I break up, please someone send me a signal so I know. Okay, a couple of things. I just wanted to touch on a couple of things that Kate said. We typically do not recommend washing panels. The hard water in Arizona will make them dirtier than they started. So please don't use your hose to hose down your panels. And then one other thing about leases is there is an additional complication with leases if the company that provided the lease goes out of business. Eventually, like your mortgage, that lease will get picked up by another company, but there sometimes is a lag in between a bankruptcy and when another company starts servicing the lease. And also, you don't have necessarily control over the quality of the customer service and those kinds of things. So those are just things to keep in mind. We've seen a lot of complications with the SunPower and Sonova leases because those companies have declared bankruptcy or are on sort of the precipice of that. So moving on. So Kate already touched on warranties a little bit. This does, relate to what I was just saying about the bankruptcy issue. So even if your installer goes bankrupt, you still have warranties in place for the panels themselves. So you have a power production warranty that's through the panel manufacturer themselves for approximately 25 years. And then the other parts or components that are used to affix the panels to your roof are going to have their own manufacturer's warranties. Also, the labor warranty is what is going to be specific to the installer. And so there are now insurance products that you can be looking at in case that should be an issue to keep in mind through things like Solar Insure and whatnot. But for the most part, the workmanship themselves or labor-related warranties are specific to your individual installer. We can go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so the main focus of my part of the presentation, because Kate and Adrian have covered a lot of substantive information, mine is to just sort of do a little bit of a refresh and things that you want to be sure to talk to either the installer about or the sales company about. And so we're just going to kind of run through them. I'm not going to go through all of these verbatim, but I want to make sure we hit the high points. Okay, so you want to understand what the total cost of the system is. That's not, taking into consideration any potential tax credits that you may or may not qualify for. The individual installer or the sales company is probably not going to know what tax credits that you apply for. They're probably going to just generically assume that you apply, that the max tax credit is going to be applicable to you. But that may not be the case if you don't have tax liability. And so if you're someone who's on a fixed income or you're not paying taxes, you should probably not assume that's going to apply to you, but you're going to want to make sure you understand what the total dollar figure is that you are expected to owe regardless of what happens tax credit wise. You really want to understand how much power you were using before and how that relates to the size of the system that's being installed. If you have something like a lease, like Kate was talking about, there should be performance guarantees in there. If it's something you're paying either cash for or you're getting a loan from a financial institution for, you're going to want to have a sense of with the system and how much it's producing, how much that's going to reduce your bill based on your usage. And you need to keep in mind your pattern of usage. So when you're using power, if you're going to be adding an EV, if you're going to be electrifying your water heater, if you've got a baby on the way, all of these things are going to impact your usage down the road that you may or may not want to be taking into consideration when you're getting solar today. This is something that Adrian mentioned, or one of them mentioned regarding batteries. Unless you have a battery, your system is not going to island, which means if there is an outage in your neighborhood and you do not have a battery, even if it's the middle of the day, you are also not going to have power. It's going to shut off. It's a security feature or safety mechanism that applies to everyone. We already talked a little bit about when you use the most power. It is probably not surprising, hopefully, to almost everyone that the sun does not shine at night. And so unless you have a battery, your system is not producing at night. So any power that you're using at night is coming from the utility, which means that you're paying for it. And that is going to add to your bill. And it's not, because we don't have net metering anymore, it's not a direct offset. So let's say you have surplus power at 2 p.m. and you're sending it back to the utility, and then you're buying a bunch of power at 10 p.m., that power costs a lot more than what you're being paid for the power that you provide to the grid at 2. So there's not an offset there, and you're paying for this difference in here. Okay, and so people need to keep that in mind. So if you have a pool pump, you're charging an EV, you're running your dishwasher, you're running your laundry, you need to be doing that stuff during the day, or have a device that allows you to set it for during the day, or think about whether or not your lifestyle accommodates being able to really use power when your system's producing, unless you have a battery. You want to make sure that you understand your bill. You want to understand your rate plan. The new bills for APS are way better in which they actually tell you how much you're producing. They tell you how much you're selling back to the grid, at what rate. For a long time, that wasn't clear. And so your export rate is actually on your new bills now, and those kinds of things. And those are things that you're going to want to make sure that you kind of understand going in. I like to tell people that this is not a passive product. It's not like your water heater, where you buy a water heater and it's running in the background and you don't really know what it's doing or when it's doing it. When you have solar, to really maximize the investment, you need to manage the usage. And it is important that you understand the export rate that Kate was talking about. So it is locked in for 10 years, but you're going to want to know what rate that is, and then know that if you modify your system down the road, that could very well impact that rate. Kind of the next slide, please. Okay. It's really important to know when you have to start paying. If you're not paying for your system with cash, you're either paying for a lease or you're paying for a loan through a financial institution. You want to know when you're gonna be expected to start payments versus when you're actually going to be start seeing reductions in your bills. So more recently, a lot of lenders will not pay the loans until you acknowledge yourself as the customer, as the one who is taking out the loan, that yes, the system has been interconnected, yes, it was installed, and it's actually operational. I think also it's something to keep in mind is all these systems will have apps associated with them. We recommend you check the app at least once a week to make sure that your system is functioning as you anticipate. Your bills from your utility will also tell you your production now relative to 12 months ago for the same month. And so if you have a bill that says your production is down 60%, that's a flag that like something needs to be looked at there. You want to know, Kate mentioned this, but it is really important to understand your interest rate. And they might tell you that you have like a 3% interest rate. You need to ask if there are additional lender or financing fees. One of the big things you'll see is if you have a credit union, they'll tell you like, you have an 8% interest rate. And that seems really high. And then if you go with like maybe a for-profit lender that your installer might show you, it's going to say 2%. Well, why would there be a 6% differential? Are there hidden fees in there that really make up that 6% differential? Like those are the questions you need to be asking, because a lot of times they'll sort of buy down the interest rate with additional fees that may not be obvious to you on the front end. And so you're going to want to make sure that you're getting an apples to apples comparison. It's important. I really recommend getting an independent roof inspection before your panels are installed. Your installer should have someone come out and take a look at your roof, but I also recommend having a roofing company that's independent from the installer also take a look. And you might also need things like an electric panel upgrade or like those kinds of work. And so those are things you're going to want to understand, and they all also are going to impact your installation process. For instance, if you have to have your electrical panel upgraded, they're going to shut off your power for like 4 to 6 hours that day. And if it's July 15th and you have a new baby that's at home and like, 7 parakeets or something, maybe not having air conditioning for 6 hours is not going to work for you. And so, those are things that you're going to want to keep in mind when you are kind of going about this process, because a lot of the times, so the RCP or the export rate steps down kind of at the end of the summer. And so that's when people kind of like have a rush to install, but your lock-in of the export rate is based on when you sign the contract and apply for interconnection, not when the system's actually turned on. So you don't need to feel rushed necessarily in that process. It's important to understand what would happen if you do have issues with the warranty. Are they transferable to a new homeowner? Are they transferable if the installer changes? How long are they? You'll want to ask questions like Kate brought up about maintenance. What do you do if you look at your app and it says like you have like almost no usage? Like, I don't know, when you look at like 3 days and they're all not working, or you get a bill and it's much higher than you expected, who are you supposed to talk to about any kind of repair? What happens if they have to be taken off your roof or not? And that's going to make a big difference if you have a lease or a loan. You want to understand, are you the only one monitoring the performance of the system, or is it being monitored by the company? Is the sales company the same as the installation company? And then other things we recommend, Kate mentioned getting multiple quotes. You can get things like the contractor number from the installation company. And then I would get a sense of, depending on what city or county you live in, the installation could take longer because the permitting timeline is different and the interconnection process might be different with the utility. And those are things you would want to ask your installer just to manage expectations. Could I have the next slide, please? Okay, so the point of this class, and we have a website focused on solar customers, is so that you are informed on the front end before you make a really major purchase. What I like to tell people is you're investing $30,000 or $40,000. This is a major purchase. This is not gum. And so it is really important for people to do their homework on the front end, get multiple quotes, get organizations like Solar United Neighbors to review those quotes for you for free, wait to participate in the co-op and those kinds of things so that you're really doing your due diligence on the front end. But sometimes something still goes wrong, or maybe someone didn't know about all those resources and then they still had a problem. And so these agencies are here if you need to file a complaint. We have links to all of these also on our Solar Customers website. Maybe Jess, can you also maybe put in Aracia Solar Customers website's link in the chat too? That'd be awesome. So what I like to tell people is there's sort of like staged levels of kind of complaints. And so if you have a situation in which maybe something isn't majorly wrong yet, but you're like not having great customer service or something along those lines, people aren't getting back to you, then I usually recommend that's like file an online, like a bad online review kind of level. And if that doesn't like help jumpstart things, then that's when I usually suggest the BBB route. You can either do a complaint or a review through the BBB. If that still doesn't work, then you have the Registrar of Contractors and the Attorney General's office, and these are state agencies. You would complain to the ROC for things like mechanical issues, anything that has to do with the actual installation, the contractor, the quality, those kinds of things. The Attorney General's office is if you have a complaint about like some kind of disreputable sales practice, like some sort of like misinformation or something that was provided to you that you think is untrue, or like something questionable in the sales process. So for instance, maybe you're told you get tax credits and you don't, or things like that. That's kind of where the AG's office would come into play. It's less of a mechanical issue and more as far as like, truth in the information that was presented during the process of the sale. Could I have the next slide, please? Okay, so these are some of the links that I was just talking about. Jess posts, these are in the slides that we'll send you, but these are just a few of the things. So we have a customer resources page. Sun has a whole bunch of resources, including a hotline that you can call and ask questions. And then SEIA, which is the National Solar Energy Industry Association, has a very robust amount of consumer protection information. They have a whole like residential guide for buying solar and those kinds of things. So this kind of depends on how deep of a dive you want to do. Maybe you just start with passively reviewing a website, and then you might move to a call with Sun. And then if you really, have a lot of questions or you want to do a lot of homework, then you might go to like a SEIA guide or those